Cool. Hey everyone. I hope you are somewhere comfortable with a quality gin or whiskey in hand. And today we've got Megan with us. Hi, Megan.
Hello, how are you?
It's kind of weird. I haven't seen you since, was it end of February or early March? We did the tasting in Hamilton.
Yeah, that was it, just before kind of Paddy's Day when everything changed.
Yeah,
Little did we think in a couple of weeks' time will we all be locked indoors for the foreseeable.
yeah.
Good
And
times.
we had the Jamesons and the Redbreast during that tasting, which was just a brilliant event. And my favorite was the Redbreast 21 that night. It was just a beautiful whiskey.
Yeah, it was such a treat to get to taste it. I'm sure everyone who attended could agree, and myself included. It's not often I get to have a dram for a breast 21.
Yeah. So let's get right into it. Obviously we can literally see the Jameson bottle behind you.
Yeah,
Um,
yeah.
yeah. So do you want to just maybe segue us from the Jameson into what Method of Madness is, or the parent company behind it? Yeah.
Cool. So I suppose I'll give a little bit of insight behind myself as well and how I got here, and it'll kind of help with this story a little bit. So, as Ash said, my name is Megan. I am the Jameson and Irish Whiskey Ambassador for New Zealand. So a lot of people know Jameson, but it is comes from a distillery called Middleton Distillery. And Middleton Distillery don't just produce Jameson, they produce lots of other amazing Irish whiskies, such as Redbreast, the Spot whiskies. We do a couple of gins, and we also do the Method and Madness range. So a lot of our brands actually date quite far in history. So we have Jameson, who I mainly work with, and that's since 1780. We've been making Jameson Original, the one that lots of people know and love. And we also have expanded our portfolio there, have lots of amazing innovation like Jameson Black Barrel, we have the Castmates, the beer aged whiskey, with some amazing products there. And we also have like Redbreast, it's been around since 1912, I believe. But so if you think about it, we have some of like incredible talent working on these whiskies in our distillery, and they know like everything there is to know about making the most incredible whiskies when it comes to all parts of the process, from distilling to blending to the maturation process. But if you think about it, there's a very set recipe, if you call it, when it comes to making a lot of these products. Like there's a certain way the Jameson tastes, and like I said, they haven't strayed from the original recipe since 1780. And of course, we have innovation, but you can't flex too far away from what Jameson taste profile is and what it stands for. And the same goes for like Redbreast and the Spot whiskies and things like that. So if we have any creatives watching out there, we know when it comes to creative people and people who like to experiment, they like to have a little bit of creative flexibility, and they like to be able to try new things and, have a bit of trial and error, like try something new, try something groundbreaking. And if it doesn't work out, then it's a lesson learned. And if it does work out, you come up with the amazing next new thing. So that's kind of the premise behind the Method of Madness range. So we have all these incredible whiskies in our portfolio, but they wanted to create something where they could experiment. So we have a micro distillery in Middleton. So it's all about experimentation. You have some of the masters and apprentices from Middleton. They'd be working in here in their like spare time, I suppose, in their working days, and they'd be trying new techniques, taking like inspiration from different countries and things like that, while sticking to what makes Irish whiskey Irish whiskey. So that's where Method of Madness came from. Essentially, it's an experimentation brand. So if any of the masters or the apprentices in Middleton, if they come up with anything that's worth bringing to market, like I said, there's trial and error. There's a lot of error when it comes to experimentation, but sometimes things go really right. So they wanted to create a platform to be able to bring these experiments to life, and that's where the Method of Madness range was born. So a little bit about the name, and I'll show you the bottle here as well to demonstrate. I know it might be backwards here in this, but the name Method of Madness kind of refers to what I was speaking here, and it's everything to do with the way the bottle looks and the way the brand presents itself. It's to do with being quite a regiment in the method. Like there's a certain way that Irish whiskey is made. There's certain rules and regulations that we have to follow, but then being quite experimental and a bit mad on how they finish it and the techniques they bring into it. So if you can see here from the bottle, you can see it says Method of Madness, and then you have really straight lines on this side, and on the other side you have kind of like a watercolor creation here, and it shows you how like you're going to be very regimented in the method, and like that you're going to experiment and like take all the chances when it comes to the madness. And it kind of goes all through the bottle. You'll see here there's like some spirals and things like that, and the other side there's straight lines. So this bottle in itself is a work of art. It's created by a couple, I think they're from Sweden, and they're artists. They created the way the bottle looks and all of the labels and the branding and everything to do with this brand. So in itself, it is work of art. So it is really like a whiskey for those who like trying something different. They like experimenting, and they like trying things that are sometimes a world's first and other times a distillery's first for us, which is everything that this brand is about. A lot of times we try something for the first time.
Right. That's perfect. So Megan, what I'm getting at is, and that's what I struggle to sort of convey to customers sometimes, is at the heart of it is the Middleton Distillery. And it's been around for a long time. There are people who've been working there for decades. And the range comes from that many, many years of experience that's been earned and learned over the years. And obviously there's different brands coming out of it. In terms of this range, I quite like that sort of funky look. You know, it's you know, if you look at the standard Jameson or the Redbreast, you know, very like Redbreast changing recently in labels.
They had a bit of a back redesign.
Yeah. So which, I mean, you know, I'm all about the whiskey. Which one are we going to try first?
I think we could start off with the single grain, and then we can kind of, because if anyone has any bottles or for yourself when you're tasting, I think it's best to start with single grain, and we'll work our way then up to the more fuller bodied whiskies. I think it is quite interesting as well, because we're obviously coming up to Father's Day here in New Zealand, but in Ireland, we celebrate Father's Day around June. And last year, I was actually working in Ireland, quite close contact with the distillery. So I bought a bottle of, I think it was a single pot still, I bought for my dad. And he opened it. And like, my dad isn't very, like, he's not a person that keeps a lot of things, but he opened it. He obviously enjoyed the whiskey. He was like, fabulous. And he's kept the bottle as a bit of like a display in his like alcohol cabinet, because it looks so beautiful in itself. And my mom actually nicked it recently and put a candle in it. Now it's a centerpiece of one of our tables.
Wow. I mean, I think you're right though. Like the bottle in your whiskey, you know, it's a work of art, you know. And I did a couple of YouTube reviews recently, and I say to them, I'm a big fan of distilleries that put a bit of effort into the bottle, because you know, from a customer's perspective, you know, it's literally in their hands. Luckily, no metal robots are going to take that away from us humans handling our own whiskey bottles, at least for the time being. So when it comes in your hand, it's an experience, and luckily it's a pleasurable, you know, experience here.
For sure. And actually, a little bit of a fun fact for you. I know I was talking a lot about the distillery just there, but I was talking about the rules we have to follow. So when it comes to, we have had a long history when it comes to Irish whiskey. The first ever written record of Irish whiskey was in 1405. So it's been around for years and years. There was like lots of ups and downs within that time as well, like there is with everything. But there wasn't actually like any kind of legal protection over Irish whiskey back in like the 1920s. And when it came to prohibition in America and things like that, there was bootleggers making their own moonshine and whatnot, and they were calling it Irish whiskey. There was nothing to kind of protect the category. So since that, because obviously this really tarnished our reputation, Irish whiskey has been geographically protected. So to legally call yourself an Irish whiskey, you need to be made, matured and bottled on the island of Ireland. So that means every single drop that we're tasting here right now, the Method of Madness range or Jameson or anything like that, it's been bottled in Ireland and sent to New Zealand, which I think is quite interesting, because New Zealand is one of the furthest places in the world away from Ireland. So we have some of the best travelled whiskey that we're sipping on here at the moment.
Yeah. Nice. So single grain, could you tell the people what's happening here, or what's the key difference?
Cool. I suppose, like I kind of touched on earlier, the key thing with all of these whiskies is that it's kind of a first. It's always the first time we've done something, or it could be an industry first, or for us it could be like our masters and apprentices first time bringing something like this to market. So it's the first time our distillery has ever done a single grain whiskey. We'll talk a little bit about kind of the traditional style of making Irish whiskey later, but typically, like the traditional style would be a pot still. And if you're talking about Jameson or something like that, it's a blended whiskey. But this is 100% grain whiskey. So what do I mean by grain whiskey? Essentially, it's a base of corn and malted barley. You need the malted barley to have those sugars essential for the alcohol making process, and it's made in a column still. So that's a continuous still. It looks like a big, massive chimney. A lot of people will be used to maybe seeing a pot still if you're familiar with the whiskey making process. But this is made in a column still, so a continuous distillation, and it's always done 3 times. So the big thing you need to remember about Irish whiskey is that it is triple distilled. So that goes for Jameson, the same as it does for Redbreast, as it does for Method of Madness. So like that, we distill our whiskey 3 times, and it's 100% made in the column still. So it's grain whiskey. And with this whiskey as well, which we don't tend to do quite often, it's been matured. So it's been matured in bourbon barrels, which is quite typical to an Irish whiskey. We normally use bourbon and sherry, but this is 100% bourbon barrels. And then it's finished off in virgin Spanish oak. So it's not very often we will, in our distillery, mature anything in virgin oak. And then this one, the virgin Spanish oak, which is a little bit less sweet than, say, an American oak, but it gives a lovely sweet caramel palate to this whiskey. So if you're like on the nose here, what I kind of get is you get that lovely sweetness, but it's quite like a fresh sweetness, I feel, because sometimes things can, not like a synthetic taste, but like sometimes when you smell, you taste like caramel, toffee, things like that, when you think about sweets, whereas this I think is more of like, it's a sweetness, but it's complemented by a nice fruitiness as well. So I personally get kind of like, imagine not like quite delicate citrus fruits, so like grapefruit or something like that, but it's complemented by a lot of that kind of caramel taste and a lovely spice too, is what I get. What do you think?
Well, I get fruitiness, but I don't get a lot of spice, just a hint of spice. I haven't said it yet, and obviously I sometimes bore people to death when I talk about whiskey because I'll just keep nosing it forever. And this has got a beautiful nose, such a pleasant nose. There's no oddity or harshness whatsoever. No. Really, and for me, having drunk a lot of whiskey, it alludes to that it's been aged for however significant amount of time. It's not a young whiskey. There is age behind it because you get the oak on the nose as well.
There's a lot of an oak influence in there as well, which I think is kind of adding to that love. Like that is where the sweetness is coming from, and obviously it's complemented by like corn itself is naturally a sweeter base. Apologies. Yeah.
Do they allude to the fact how long it might have been finished in the second cask? Is it a number of months or is it a year or?
I can't say exactly for that one, but it's like just the finish, so it wouldn't be for like a long period of time. The whiskey would have been like blended together, like from their different barrels and the bourbon barrels, and it's finished off. It's final aging. But I think what's something really interesting about these whiskies too is that they are all 46% and they're non-chill filtered, which is something when someone's tasting this whiskey are quite surprised by, because like you said, it is like really soft, it's really delicate, and you don't get any harshness with it, but I think comes from the fact that it's triple distilled. It is a really pleasant, smooth drinking experience. And like when I first tasted this, I couldn't believe it was 46%, to be honest.
Yeah. Well, you don't feel the alcohol vapor either on the nose or on the palate?
No. Beautiful.
Well, virtual cilantro to you.
Cilantro. Glad to see you've been practicing your Irish over lockdown, Ash.
Well, here's a fun fact for you. A little over 5 weeks ago, I got approached on LinkedIn by the Irish ambassador to New Zealand. He was in Hamilton for a meeting, and he invited me to just have a cup of tea or coffee with him. So I had the pleasure of chatting with him. Yeah. Have you met him?
Did you tell him you knew me? I've met him a few times.
I did. Yeah. That's great. I told him you do good work. And he gifted me this box of Barry's tea. Yeah. And a gin made in conjunction with either Barry's tea or someone else. It was a gin made with some tea in it. And what's interesting is when I came home and we made a cup of the Barry's tea, it reminded me of tea we used to drink in India when we were growing up, quite strong in taste. And because because the TV get here, and we shall not say names of TV brands, but they're very weak and soft, you know, and the berries was just, you know, it reminded me straight away of tea I used to have as a teenager.
Do you know what? That is music to my ears. Barry's Tea is my favorite tea brand, and it's really funny you brought this up because I always tell my team here in the marketing team here in Pernod Ricard, I always tell them about how great Irish tea is. And today, it's really funny you said this because today I brought in like a handful of my Barry's tea bags and I got everyone to try it. I made everyone a cup of tea and I told them, and everyone was like, it has a really like delicious, strong taste.
Nice.
So yeah, there you go.
You know,
I'm glad you're a Barry's tea fan.
both my mum and wife tried it in the office and they were like, wow, this is quite cool. Yeah. And it's funny, I sent him a bottle of Irish whiskey, which is bizarre. I'm sending Irish whiskey to the Irish ambassador, but I felt obliged, you know, to give him a gift. But it was kind of cool, you know, to sit down with him, and he does so much. And actually opened my eyes up to, he was giving me some numbers, how much liquid, you know, and the beer and the creams that leave that tiny island, you know, of Ireland. It's phenomenal, you know. It's crazy.
It's crazy the footprint we have around the world.
yeah, it's amazing. Yeah. I mean, there's probably, and we were chatting about how maybe there's lessons in there for New Zealand. You know, I mean, all the bases are there. We've got endless amount of water coming down from sky, which obviously you guys have as well. You know, good clean water. But I guess then you need the marketing as well. You know, to get the product moving. Yeah.
And if there's anything about Irish people, we're talkers. We'll talk to anyone that will listen to us, and we'll talk about how great the things we have at home are. But I'm delighted you got to meet Peter. He's such a lovely man.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I've said to him, you know, if he's ever back in Hamilton, I'm always keen to meet him. And he's a very well-traveled man as well. So yeah. That's so good.
Wonderful.
So the single grain, like for me, if I had to compare, and obviously I drink significant amount of Scotch whiskey. It's just like a natural thing. We always just drink more Scotch. Every party you go to, that seems to be the first one. But also the bottle behind your left shoulder, the Jameson, it's becoming, it's penetrating every party now. You know, people are bringing it in either to mix or drink neat, and there's cool other options. You know,
Jameson dry and lime, my favorite way to have it.
Yeah. But this one, you know, I would gladly recommend it to someone, you know, who's spending that sort of $70 to $100. There's no oddity in here. There's no intense spice or smokiness. It's a very pleasant whiskey, just enough spice to intrigue you, but otherwise, very smooth ride. And like you said, 46%, you know, unchill filtered, which again, favorite thing of mine, you know. Not a big fan of filtered whiskeys, but you know, sometimes we put up with them. Yeah. And is there any color added to these? Do you know, Megan, or these are natural color?
I can't say 100%, but from I believe it is natural color, but I would have to check that 100%. But I believe that it is natural color.
Right. Cool. Right. Which one are we going to do next?
I think we should move on to the single malt, potentially.
Yeah. Sure. Yeah.
Cool. I love the sound of a whiskey bottle popping open when it has the cork.
And just for the record for people watching at home, Megan didn't send me these. I have the whole set at home, and it drops dramatically. And I mean, I can bring them back here. Obviously, if you look at the single malt versus the other one, obviously, I prefer the single malt out of the range.
You have a favorite?
Yeah. Because it's just, well, actually, I'll let you do the talking and explain the flavors, but it's definitely my favorite out of the three.
You should tell everyone about the first time you ever tried the Method of Madness range.
Well, so Megan visited me in a tiny town called Huntley at one of our warehouses, and I kind of thought it's a brand that's just been put together. You know, I didn't think much of it, but that's so good about whiskey. You know, a glass being shoved in your face and you try it, and I nosed it and I was like, this is so good, you know. it's quite good. And I had one try, and I think I had a couple of tries with it, and I was like, this was quite cool. And then you dropped an age statement at me, and I was like, why aren't you putting that on the bottle? Because the product will fly, because that's what marketing has done over the last 30 years, unfortunately. People think age statement, instead of just trying to liquor it for what it's worth. But back to you.
Yeah, it's quite funny tasting these delicious premium whiskies on top of a couple of pallets in a warehouse. It was quite fun. Yeah, so as we were chatting about earlier, this is kind of like the complete opposite flavor profile to what we've just tasted. So the single grain. So this is a single malt. A lot of people would be familiar with single malts, and a lot that comes to mind is Scotch. It is quite like goes hand in hand when it comes to Scottish whiskies. And we've actually never done a single malt in our distillery. And there's very few Irish single malts out there as well. So yeah, of course, it was a natural one that the guys, the amazing talent in our distillery, were going to try and do. And what we have here, I'm just going to bring the bottle forward so you might be able to see a little bit better. So this is 100% malted barley. So this is made in a pot still. So if you know a little bit about the whiskey making process, or if you don't, I was like explaining here, there's two different types of distillation. Distillation is essentially separating alcohol from water. It's how you create a spirit. So all like vodka, gin, whiskey would be distilled. So this is made in a pot still, which is shaped kind of like an onion, like that kind of way. It's made of copper, and 100% malted barley. So barley that's been steeped in water, sugar's released, and it becomes malted. But one thing that's quite different about, there you go, for reference, pot still, that's what it looks like.
Yeah.
But what's quite interesting about this single malt and any of the whiskies in our portfolio we make in Middleton is that we will never ever have a smoky taste any of our whiskies, because how our malt is dried is with 100% hot air. It's never used with like peat or turf or anything like that to give you that kind of smoky taste. So yeah, 100% malted barley. It has a really, really delicious palate, this one. I love it. It's so creamy, it's so oily. And I think that's something that is quite signature to pot still type of whiskey as well. So this is, like I said, 100% malted barley, made in a pot still, but it has a really creamy, oily kind of taste as well. Has a lot of spice in there too, and a lovely fruitiness. What I kind of get, and how I describe this whiskey to people, is kind of like banoffee pie. I don't know if you've heard me say this before, Ash. But because it has a lovely banoffee pie. Have you had banoffee pie before?
Nah.
So banoffee pie, for those of you that don't know, is basically a dessert. It's quite big in Ireland, but it's a biscuit base. So it's like butter and biscuit base. So it's quite like buttery, quite creamy, and has that lovely malt biscuit taste. Then on top of that is caramel, but like a toffee. So you make a toffee, so you have that lovely sweetness, like quite creamy toffee sweetness. Then it has banana, which gives that lovely kind of tastes coming from this whiskey as well. So it's actually something you get a lot in single malts and single pot stills, is kind of a banana taste, which comes from the oxidization of the copper in the pot stills. And then you have your cream on top, which is like the finish. It's quite creamy, it coats your mouth, it lingers for ages. And you were talking earlier as well about age statements, and it's something that a lot of whiskeys these days have. They do have age statements on their whiskies, because for those of you that aren't too familiar with the whiskey making process, every year, so to have an age statement on a whiskey, it needs to be matured for a minimum of those years. So for every year you mature your whiskey in a barrel or in a cask, you lose 2% to evaporation. So for every year it's in the barrel, you've less liquid in there that you could bottle and sell as a whiskey. So that 2% doesn't sound like a lot, but for the amount of barrels and the amount of casks that we have in our warehouse in Middleton Distillery, that's the equivalent, when it comes to Jameson anyway, to one bottle every 3 seconds.
Oh, wow.
So it's quite a big... I know. It's crazy when you put it into perspective like that, but obviously that over time, so every year that the spirit is sitting in a barrel, it's becoming more and more expensive because there's less of it there. If that makes sense. So yeah, that's kind of why people have this perception. So a lot of time higher age statement whiskies come with a higher price tag because they are more expensive to produce, essentially, because there's less of it there to sell. So that sometimes in people's minds make you think that it's better, that an age statement is better, which is not actually true in my opinion. Some of my favorite whiskies are blended whiskies that don't have an age statement on them, and they might be quite younger whiskies, because younger whiskies have a completely different flavor profile to an older whiskey. When you're talking about an older whiskey, you do have a lot of influence from the maturation, a lot of influence from the wood in there. And this whiskey, it's not called out on the bottle because it's something we don't particularly like doing in our distillery, because we like to move away from the perception that age statements are better than other whiskies. But I believe this is a 14-year-old single malt from doing my research on it.
Nice.
Yeah, which is quite cool. And one thing I love about this one too, like I said, it's the first time we've done a single malt. It's been finished in bourbon barrels, and as well then it's been finished off in French Limousin oak casks, which is
French
the first time we've done that.
Champagne or cognac? Is it cognac? Cognac.
Mm.
Right. And I mean, that's something unique for you guys, because you are a big global business with footprint, different big countries where high quality spirits or wines are coming from, and obviously have the ability to pull these high quality ex-cognac casks at your disposal, to put some of your, I mean, in my mind, if you like your really smooth, easy drinking whiskey, this is a perfect marriage, because you've got a long age ex-bourbon, and then you've got put into this cognac cask. It's just, yeah. And,
so yeah, that's it. So like I said before, Irish whiskies are always triple distilled. So we go through that process. Then it's laid to rest for a minimum of 14 years in bourbon barrels, and then finished off in those French Limousin oak casks. So it gives a really nice dimension to this whiskey.
It's very nice on the nose.
Yeah, it is. You get a lot of that maltiness, I feel, on the nose. That biscuit kind of. But it's not what I like about this one too, is that it does have a little bit of like sharpness to it as well. Like you have single malts, it is quite a balanced flavor, but it does kind of pack a little bit of a punch there at the end. Not too much spice in there. It's quite delicate as well, I feel.
I don't find there's just a hint of the spice, but otherwise,
like in the back of the palate.
Yeah, but also I actually reviewed our Balvenie single barrel last night, and it ended up being quite tropical fruit, where I think maybe the cognac cask, and I haven't drank much cognac to be honest, but maybe the cognac cask is stopping it from being too tropical fruit, because that can be annoying sometimes. It's too much of
I think it's just something different. And I think a lot of single malts too do have that like tropical fruit kind of flavor profile to it. And I just think that this is just a really different drinking experience.
Yeah.
It's beautiful.
Yeah. Or it's like from the moment, and it's probably been a year in that warehouse.
It actually has been a year.
Yeah. And I've been enjoying it. It's been fantastic whiskey. And like before that, I think the one I liked the most was the Jameson 18, the one that I've my own money opened repeatedly. And now Redbreast 21. But then now this has sort of come in and just blown my mind. Very, very good whiskey.
I'm delighted to hear that. Brilliant.
Yeah. So
that's great.
We've done the single grain. So like yesterday I was doing some training for our Indian restaurant staff, and was explaining to them the difference in the grain and what the flavors profile can change. So far we've had the single grain, which is corn and malted barley. And then now we've done the single malt, which is 100% malted barley.
Yes, indeed.
Triple distilled, really, really smooth, bourbon cask, but then finish in the cognac. All right. And then we come to the last one, which I always struggle to explain to people, but I think you will do a far better job of doing. Is the
we'll try.
The pot still, because it's something very unique and very Irish, obviously.
So if I don't like speaking favorites a lot of the time, but I think it is fair to say that everyone has their favorites, and for me it is the single pot still. I'm going to just pour myself a little Dram of it as we were speaking. But why I love the single pot still so much, well, one thing for me is I love full-bodied whiskies. I love whiskies that have a lot of spice in them and that they do last quite long on your palate. If I was going to have a whiskey that's kind of a sip and savor or an after dinner or an aperitif or something like that, I love having a single pasta because I feel like it just has that really pleasant drinking experience. It's so full-bodied, it's like an explosion of flavor in your mouth, and then it has such a delicious, smooth, oily, creamy, full-bodied finish. So you were saying it is quite traditional to Irish whiskey. So a single pot still is basically like as Irish whiskey as you can get. It's like the quintessential style of making Irish whiskey. It's very traditional style. So it's basically Ireland's answer to a single malt. It's like an Irish single malt essentially, because one thing you might know, well, I know you know because I've talked to you a lot about it, Ash, for maybe people out there listening, that Irish whiskey, the like traditional way of making Irish whiskey, is with malted barley and unmalted barley. So it kind of came about by accident. Our country was under British rule at the time, and there was lots of different taxes and things like that. One being a malting tax. So a lot of the products we did a lot of baking, which obviously needed malt for, and the alcohol industry was massive. Now at the time, the Irish whiskey industry was absolutely booming. There was thousands of different distilleries in our tiny little island, and we were exporting to loads of places around the world. So it was a really great time for our industry, but obviously there was a lot of money to be made if you were to put a tax on something that was essential to the process, such as malt. So Irish people, we tried to be quite crafty with things, and obviously they were still learning a lot about the process at this time. So they decided to put a little bit of unmalted barley in with malted barley. So like I was explaining earlier, malted barley is barley that undergoes a bit of a process to release sugars, which is essential to the alcohol, to creating alcohol with the yeast. And then unmalted barley is essentially barley off the fields, as fresh as you could get it. And it hasn't been, and it's unprocessed, there's nothing been done to it. So they thought basically what would happen was it would just bulk up the mix a little bit. They'd save a little bit of money because they wouldn't be using as much malted barley because they were bulking up unmalted barley, and that it would just no one would know the difference. But what it actually did was it really changed the finish of the whiskey. Particularly, it really added an extra depth and dimension to the Irish whiskey. So the big thing that the unmalted barley does is that adds a lot of an oily and creaminess to the whiskey. So we were talking earlier about the single malt. It does have a little bit of that creaminess there, but it does have a little bit of a sharper finish in comparison to when we tried the single malt. This is really creamy, really oily. You'll find it coats the sides of your cheeks, your tongue. You'll find a lot of spice on the tip of your tongue and the sides of your palate, and it will last. Like you will, 5 minutes later after taking a sip, you'll still have that flavor lingering in your mouth and that creaminess coating your mouth. And that's all thanks to the unmalted barley. So when the guys discovered this, they discovered what a difference this made to it. They said, you know what, we're going to own this, and this is going to be like going forward how we're going to make our whiskey. And it became quite unique to Irish whiskey. I'm not sure there's many other places that may put unmalted barley in their whiskey too. And you'll find if you taste any Irish whiskey, such as like Jameson or something like that, you will get a lot of that oiliness and that creaminess. And that's all thanks to unmalted barley. So like I said, single pot still is the quintessential style of making Irish whiskey. Moreover, you'd have your single pot still. So that is made in a pot still, like we were talking about earlier, a copper pot still, with malted and unmalted barley, triple distilled and matured in a mixture of sherry, butts and bourbon barrels. That's kind of the signature quintessential style of making an Irish whiskey. And that's kind of what this is, but with a twist. Of course, there has to be a twist. So it's all that kind of like those flavors that are quite signature to an Irish pot still. And then it is finished off in French chestnut, which is the first time we've ever matured in a wood like chestnut. So typically we use oak, but yeah, that chestnut gives a really delicious dimension to the whiskey. So I don't know if we have a little cheers and a little sip, and we can flavor it. So
yeah. So the French chestnut, can you tell me a little bit more, because I'm not very familiar with it. So different to normal French oak?
Yeah, so it's chestnut wood, so it's from a chestnut tree.
Right.
So it's not from an oak tree, so it's a completely different type of wood. And the chestnut, I'm not sure of the exact flavor this is adding to it, but it is adding to, I don't know, but I kind of get, you don't get that caramel sweetness from this whiskey, even though there is the influence of the bourbon barrel, there's something a little bit more overpowering in it. And I think the sweetness is kind of like a licorice sweetness, something like that. That's like when I get mad, I get like a bit of licorice. I get a lot of that like cinnamon spices coming from the sherry casks. But it is giving, it's less of that signature sweetness that comes from the oak, because you're having that finish in the chestnut, and it brings it up a lot more of a fruity finish, I feel.
Nice. I mean, what I'm experiencing on my palate, I wouldn't quite say it's spice. It's something very different. I'm feeling a little bit more heat. I think as you were saying, you know, a little bit more heat on the palate. You know, because people like you and me, we drink far too much whiskey. But for someone new, they would associate it with thinking it's too high in ABV. It's not. It's the same ABV as the other two, 46%. But somehow this feels quite a lot warmer.
It does give a lot of warmth, and that's something that is quite signature to a pot still as well. It brings a lot of warmth, especially with the influence from the maturation, the sherry butts too, because you have a lot of that like warming spice. You've your cinnamon, your nutmeg, your cloves, those kind of spices, what comes to my mind on the palate. And it does give that, like, even when I'm talking now, like I can just feel it in my palate just lingering away there, and it's such a delicious drinking experience. I must say, like, I love just sitting down and savoring this one.
Yeah. So to digress just a little, could you just bring in Redbreast into the conversation a little? So pot still?
Yes, just to give you a bit of context, Redbreast is probably the most well-known single pot still in the world. Redbreast 21 has won like many accolades and awards. It's the most awarded Irish pot still there is. But yeah, so that is like basically, if you were to bottle what a quintessential, like traditional Irish pot still at its finest is, it's Redbreast. That's like everything that it embodies. And then obviously when it comes to this one, it's a little bit more experimental, I should say, sorry. And yeah, you have those extra flavor components in there. But if you wanted what will be the most classic style of an Irish pot still, I'd be pointing in the direction of Redbreast. It's like my go-to after dinner whiskey. If I was going out for a dinner or something like that, it's just delicious.
Yeah. So I think you already played favorites by saying this is,
I know,
the pot still is your.
I'm like an open book.
But can I ask, is that because you've sort of grown up around that unique method of Irish whiskies, the single pot still, the malt, half malted, half unmalted, the flavor resonates with you? Because I mean,
I think so. Like, obviously, like, I didn't know too much about whiskey until I kind of got into, say, like my 20s is when I kind of started trying different whiskeys and things like that. And yeah, just from like my training in the distillery too, I just found it fascinating, the process and the method and how it came to be Irish pot still. And just for me, like I said, I just know if I'm having single pot still whiskey, I'm going to get a full-bodied, like spicy, creamy, oily drinking experience, which is what I look for when I want a whiskey to like sip and savor and things like that. So I just know I'll always get what I'm looking for if I go with a single pot still.
Yeah. Nice. And can I ask you another question? Obviously, you work for a great company that has so many great number of products as well. And this might test your loyalty a little. Do you like the single pot still Redbreast, or do you like the Method of Madness single pot still, or could be any of the age stated Redbreast? Is there a favorite more, or?
I don't like playing favorites between the brands, to be honest. I can pick my favorites within the brand, but I don't like choosing one over the other. I'm like a proud mother. I can't pick favorites when it comes to all my lovely children.
Yeah. Do you know Kenneth Vogue at all at Cadrona Distillery down south?
I have met him once before.
Yeah, he's just sent me a picture of his Method of Madness. I'm guessing he's watching live.
Hello.
He's a great man. I'll just read you a couple of the comments as well. Kojula, she buys quite a lot of gin from us. Just says enlightening and entertaining talk. Very interesting explanation. Why the longer age the whiskey, the more expensive it is. And Craig, who buys quite a few Irish whiskies of us, oh man, I think my credit card might have to take another hit, Ash. You got to stop doing this to me. And then, yeah, good evening to you. And yeah, thanks for the good stream. All right. So, should we move on to the gin?
Yeah,
Yep.
for
Cool.
sure. For sure. So, as I was explaining a little bit earlier, this whole brand is about this whole like range is all about experimentation and trying things for the first time. So, typically in a distillery, when someone sets up a distillery, obviously I haven't done one myself, but a lot of the time when it comes to whiskey, it is quite an expensive thing to start doing because you obviously have to mature whiskey. So for Irish whiskey, it needs to be matured for a minimum of 3 years. So it does take, you know, if you want to be selling your product, you obviously have to have that period in between where you're maturing your whiskey and you need to wait for your product to be ready before you can sell it. So a lot of the time, a distillery will bring out a gin or a vodka or something like that because this doesn't need maturation. So these products are also distilled and everything like that. But what's unique about them is as a clear spirit, oftentimes there obviously is some that have been finished off for maturity, things like that, but typically they wouldn't be. So, of course, when it comes to Method and Madness, they had to do things backwards. So they came out with a whiskey range, because obviously they've been making whiskey for years and years, and they decided to add to their portfolio a micro distilled gin. So this gin is, I'm going to make a bit of a bold statement. It's my favorite gin I've ever tried. I am a whiskey girl. I work with whiskeys. I love whiskeys. My go-to drink. Jameson dry and lime and a night out is my go-to. But I do love, I am partial to gin every so often, and this one will be my favorite. Obviously amazing in a gin and tonic, but what's unreal about this one, it's been triple distilled too, so it's actually so palatable you can have it on its own either. It's probably the only gin that I would probably sip and eat. I don't know, maybe I might change my opinion on that one if I try a couple of more. I know Cadrona do beautiful gins as well, so I might change my opinion, but up to this point I haven't tried a gin that I have really enjoyed like sipping and savoring like we were talking about earlier. So what's amazing about this whiskey, and I don't typically cover gin, but only for the fact Ash asked me so nicely, I said I would talk to it. And why I have such a soft spot for this gin as well is that this is a micro distilled gin. It's made by just two people. There's just two people in the distillery that make it, one of them being a really good friend of mine that I trained with when I first got this job, and we did all of our training in the distillery. So that's why I have such a soft spot for it. She educated me all around it and I love it so much. So again, it follows the same kind of look and feel as the rest of the range, but the label is in more of a circle than a rectangle. But you can see the bottle and all that. Obviously it's blue bottle. But yeah, this is all based on local influence as well. So with everything we do with our distillery, we try and source all our ingredients within a 100-mile radius of our distillery. It's all very much a local ordeal. We get our water source from a river called the Dumgorny River that flows directly through our distillery. So the only exception to it is corn, because Ireland has never been accused of having a warm climate, so we physically can't grow corn. So we have to get that from the south of France. But other than that, it's all very much a local diet that our range lives on. So a lot of local influence here. There's 16 different botanicals, the two main ones being Irish gorse flower and black lemon, which is actually like a dehydrated lime. But what you'll get from this is a lot, it's 43% as well, so it is a higher ABV, but just such a pleasant drinking experience as well. It is like I said, micro distilled, triple distilled, so super smooth on the palate. I get a lot of lemon balm, like I wouldn't even call it like lemon juice. It's like a lemon balm. It's quite oily. It is quite intense in flavor, and it is just like I get things from this as well, like ginger, like freshly grated ginger. You know, that kind of spice you get from that, and a lot of earthy undertones too.
So Megan, I'm happy to say on the record, this is one of my most favorite whiskeys. Gin. and thing is, I'm not saying it just because you're here and you're live. You can reference back to Adrian. It's been a few months when he first gave me a try of it, and because obviously I drink a lot of whiskey, I don't like fruity things. You know, I'm not a big fan, and I mean, we'll sell it to the consumer because they want it. But
And it's
not
different palettes, different flavors, different
yeah.
things for everyone.
And you didn't touch on one thing. What sort of still is it made out of? Because that's my favorite part of it.
Oh yeah, I love this story. So this is made out of the oldest gin still in Ireland. So it is shaped like a pot still as well, made of copper, but it's a lot smaller than a pot still would be, and it has actually a name. So the head distiller at the time was a man called Mickey, and they named this gin still after him. And so the gin still is called Mickey's Belly.
Oh
So if you
yeah.
ever look up Mickey's Belly gin still, you'll see, and it's quite cool because they did like some restoration to it, so it has like a disco ball effect around it for insulation. For it's quite cool looking.
Yeah. Well, I think Craig wasn't joking. He's just bought one each of all of the whiskies, so his credit card has taken a bit of a hit. Yeah.
Good
But
man, Craig. That's what we like here.
yeah. What I was alluding to before, so like there's only a handful of gins that I do like drinking neat, because drinking carbonated drinks doesn't resonate with me. I get very bloated very easily, like beer as well. So I tend to like gins that I could just have with one ice cube or just drink it neat. Sometimes I like slow berry gins, because it's like a dessert in itself. Or instead of drinking a port, you drink a slow berry gin. But this one, it's got quite an earthy character. It's not overpowering in any way. There's no because you know how some of them can be just way too much citrus, which then you got to kill and neutralize with a tonic, which is like, I don't want to do that. I want the gin to be just pleasant on its own. Now you told me a particular fever-tree I've arranged for it.
So obviously, like I said, this is a delicious one if you want to have it on your own. Like a lot of people will say sometimes they actually don't like gin, but a lot of the time it's because people don't like the taste of tonic. So it is nice to know that this is a gin that is completely delicious. You get so much flavor from it even on its own. But if I was to like pick a signature way of how I like to enjoy it, I do quite like tonic in myself, but I would use a light flavored tonic. So something like a Mediterranean style. So Fever-Tree do a lovely Mediterranean style, or any of your lighter kind of style tonics go really, really well with this because there is so much flavor in this one in itself. So this one is delicious. Yeah, with how I would, if I was gonna pick my signature way of drinking this, I would have my measure of gin. I would get one of those big ice cubes, like one big block. I would pour my tonic on top of it, and I would take some lemon peel, give it a little bit of a twist over, let the lovely essence and oils come into the glass, give it a little bit of wipe around the rim, and drop it into your glass, and you'll get the lovely aromas from the lemon oil coming to your nose as you're sipping and giving a beautiful experiential drinking experience.
Nice. Well, I didn't do the lemon, but I did have the aromatic Fever-Tree. Yeah. Which so can I ask you another question? Obviously, I know you talk more about whiskey, but is there a certain measure? Like when I do my gin tastings, I tell them a third gin and 2/3 tonic. Don't drown it with tonic, otherwise, why have nice expensive gin? Is there something you say?
Yeah. So yeah, typically when I would do like make up a drink, like a long drink, any highball, what I prefer to go with is 1 part like whiskey or 1 part gin, and then 2 parts mixer.
Right.
It's not. It's obviously up to personal preference, and everyone has different tastes. But that's just how I like to do it. And I always like putting in lots of ice as well, because sometimes people put in too much mixer because they don't have enough ice in there. So I do like having the ice up to the top. Keeps it nice and cool. Because actually the more ice you have, the less it dilutes your drink. Because ice keeps ice in its form, if that makes sense. So the more ice you have, the less it'll get diluted. Whereas a lot of people say they want less ice because they don't want to dilute their drink. But in actual fact, the more ice you have, the slower it'll melt and your drink won't get diluted.
Yeah.
There's a hot tip for anyone out there.
I saw this video. It was a Japanese cocktail bar, and it was a 45-minute video on ice and how much they spent 4 hours preparing these ice cubes for the gentlemen and the ladies in the evening. It was Yeah, it makes
I'm
sense.
fascinated by ice, to be honest. You
Yeah,
can just
yeah,
make such incredible, and when you see the ice is really glossy and you can just see through it,
mm,
it's so cool.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Um, this is good. Here we go. There's a few comments coming through. Craig's just owning up to spending money. Looking forward to Redbreast 21. Oh yeah, he wants that for Christmas. But hey guys, we're still here for another 10 minutes. If you have any questions, put them in the comments, and I'm sure Megan be very happy to answer them. Megan, I don't know if at the start you touched on this, but you're here. You're like a spy or a sleeper agent from Ireland. You're not from these parts. Can you touch on that part? Because I find that really cool about Pernod Ricard. You know, do you angels
Yeah.
penetrate the community and spread the Irish word? You know, yeah.
Well, I've never heard someone describe me as a secret agent spy before, but
Yeah.
I'm glad
Well,
you
you're not
think
really
so
secret.
highly of me, Ash. I think I'd be so nimble that I could be a spy. But yeah, so essentially how I came to be here in Ireland, I mean, in New Zealand. So obviously I'm from Ireland, if anyone can't tell from my accent. And I got this job through part of a graduate program. So there's an international graduate program, the Jameson International Graduate Program. And what they do is they do different rounds of interviews and they hire people in Ireland, and then they'll pick who they want to hire, and then based off your personality and your past experience and everything, they'll place you in different countries. So I was working for a year and a half in Ireland, was did my training in the distillery, and then I was working as part of the marketing team in Jameson's international marketing team, working on Africa, Asia, and Latin American markets, which was really, really cool. It's a really, really cool experience. And then just a year ago, they decided that I went into another rounds of interviews, and they decided they wanted to place me in New Zealand. So I gained kind of all my experience in Ireland, and they wanted me to come to New Zealand and teach us Kiwis all about, you Kiwis all about everything Irish whiskey. So particularly Jameson. So my job title is Jameson Brand Ambassador, but then I obviously cover a range of wonderful Irish whiskies. So yeah, my job is basically just to like educate people around our brands, host events. I also do a bit of marketing, a little bit of sales, things like that. So it's a really, really exciting job. And what I love so much about it is being able to chat to everyone, and forums like this or in real life. I know we've done a few events before and things like that. And it is just like such an exciting job, and it's so exciting getting people to teach people about our wonderful brands.
And if you want to follow Meg, I'm just actually, well, you'll probably be faster. What's your Instagram handle, Megan?
So it's at jameson.meg.nz.
Right, and you can follow her journey on there. Traveling around, well, there hasn't been traveling. That's the problem. It's the core of your role, and it's been, and I feel kind of blessed. You know, I was the chosen one that hosted you in Hamilton, and then obviously COVID. You know, yeah.
One of my last events before we locked out.
Yeah. So a couple of questions from me, and then there's some questions in the comments as well. With your permission, can we do a different version of this and do a Zoom whiskey tasting, so everyone who's watching has a whiskey in their hand as well? Should we do that sometime?
Yeah, I'd be more than happy to if people would like to listen to us rambling on.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's not fair. You and I are drinking, but well, I don't know what the people are doing. I'm assuming they're drinking. No one should be working this late in the night, but I think we should do that. We'll aim for October, and let's call it the full Irish. You know, we'll do
Sounds
a few
good.
of your premium whiskies. Everyone obviously, I can't think of anyone who hasn't come across the Jameson, you know, over your left shoulder. It's every back bar, it's in every restaurant. But what intrigues obviously me is, and what I want to talk about is the premium side of things, because that's what 8 p.m. is all about. Just one last little thing. You mentioned the gentleman in your business who talks about gin. We were talking on the phone before.
Johnny Cresswell. So, like I said, and what you were saying earlier is all about Pernod Ricard, is that we have a wonderful family of brand ambassadors that cover all of our amazing products. So Johnny Cresswell covers our gins.
Right. Well, I mean, again, I will, if you could please help us. It'd be cool to do for our 8 p.m. customers, do a video where, because everyone wants to know how to mix their drink, especially gin, right?
Hmm.
And also whiskey as well. I mean, there's great many cocktails that can be made with a particular type of whiskey,
Hmm.
and it brings out the flavors, obviously. Yeah. So what's happening next? How much longer are you here? Is there anything cool happening before Christmas?
So I'm here for the foreseeable. I'm very lucky to be getting another year in New Zealand, so that's great. Not that there's anywhere I could really go to at the moment. They probably wouldn't let me out of here. There's no flights going back, so I'm delighted to be staying here for another year. And like I said, obviously I'm based in Auckland for anyone that doesn't know. So obviously we've been back in lockdown for a little bit, so a lot of my most recent events have been cancelled. But I would love to do something else up if anyone wants to let us know where they'd like you to pop up to, or like do an event, and we can definitely tee something up like that. We
Yeah.
could do it like a whiskey tasting and then teach everyone how to make, your classic whiskey cocktails. Something like that could be a really cool evening.
Is that something we should do through Zoom? I mean, like
Yeah,
people
we can do it
do
through Zoom,
that.
we can do it in real life, whatever we decide to do.
Okay, let me think about that. We could send them a box because you were telling me how your classic Jameson and a couple of the others come in the bigger bottles.
Hmm.
So we could send them some mixes, but people will have to make their own drinks. We can't be there for
Yeah,
them.
you could send an
But
ingredients list and then do a demo.
yeah,
Could be
yeah,
really cool.
I like demoing on in front of the camera.
Yeah.
'Cause, and I'm sure you must think that way as well, because like you, I host a lot of whiskey tastings as well. But when you and I are hosting, we can't drink,
Mm,
because we're there serving at the pleasure of the connoisseurs. But doing it this way, if you're sitting at home or in the office, you can have a few
happy
sips.
days.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Cool.
Great.
So one more question for you. In the foreseeable future, especially with Irish whiskey, I mean, when I do my tastings, I talk about how, the 60s and 70s and 80s was like the rock bottom, and 90s, 2000s, and now really in the last 10 years, Irish
Mm,
whiskey in particular it's skyrocketing in demand.
yeah.
I've been in the
It's one of
industry
the fastest
for,
growing premium spirits categories in the world.
yeah. Like I remember, I can sort of think of 5, 7 years ago, because I've been in the industry 16 years. The standard Jamesons went up a whole $5 retail, and
Hmm.
that was not being mean. It was either that, or we were going to run out because demand for Irish whiskey is so high,
Mm,
and it stepped away from being just a mixer to like its own category, you know,
hmm.
and obviously,
100%.
yeah. And demand for premium Irish whiskey is just phenomenal at the moment. Yeah.
It's massive.
Mm.
It's great. And why wouldn't it be? It's
Mm.
delicious.
Yeah. I agree. We need more of the pot still.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Cool. Well, I'll just see if there's any questions. I think there's some questions relevant to me. Someone wants to know when I'm coming back to Hawke's Bay. I don't know. Time will tell. And COVID, just yeah, we'll see. And someone wanted to know what is the taste of your gin. I'll read this comment to you. I love Jameson's whiskey and I love the sound of Method of Madness, but gin is an unknown area to me. My first gin and tonic was a bad experience. But he likes the sound of flavored gin. Do you think that could be part not a good tonic as well? Because that's what I
Mm.
said quite a bit. Yeah.
For sure. So like for me personally, like I said, I do love a gin and tonic. But I personally like going with kind of premium tonics if I was gonna have it. Because I think that, like I said, a lot of people say they don't like gin, but they actually have drank it in gin and tonic and they just don't like the tonic they've had. So what I'd recommend doing would be going with a light kind of flavor tonic, something like a Mediterranean style, or East Imperial, do a yuzu tonic, which is delicious as well. So if you go with one of the premium bottled tonic waters and mix it with 1 part gin and 2 parts of the tonic, you actually would probably get like 2 drinks out of like one of those smaller bottles. And
Mm,
let me know what you think. Happy to
right.
give some recommendations too. And like I said, if I was to recommend a gin, I think this is an amazing one, especially if you like whiskey. Like you said, it's not too overpowering or anything like that. It has really nice earthy herbaceous kind of tones, giving a lot of dimension to it, while also having a delicious citrus nose and tasting as well with that lemon balm coming through. from the black lemon.
Cool. We'll do the one last question and then we'll finish. I can't see the name, just says Facebook user. What is the taste of your gin like? So if you had to describe it, what are they feeling on the palate?
So I think it's different for every gin you get, because obviously the process is different. I can obviously speak quite confidently to this one. As it is triple distilled, it is really, really smooth. So like I said, I wouldn't normally have a gin neat, but I think this one is one you can taste neat. It doesn't have as much sweetness, and it doesn't have as lot of the like coating in your mouth. So if you compare it to a whiskey, it wouldn't coat your mouth as much, but you'll get kind of like that explosion of flavor on the tip of your tongue, and then you'll have like a really nice kind of, especially if you're having with a tonic water too, you have a really crisp, refreshing finish. Like how I describe a gin is it's quite crisp, it's quite refreshing. It is a great one to have with tonic water if you're looking like to quench your thirst kind of a thing. It is a really like delicious whiskey to have. I mean, a delicious drink to have.
Don't have, yeah.
Do you agree?
I 100% agree. One last question for you, and this is coming partly from me and partly from a friend of mine, Grant. Irish whiskey and cigars, is there some sort of marriage there, or is that a thing in Ireland? Obviously you're from there. Is that something you saw, or?
It wouldn't be like massive, but I suppose it depends. Like when I would talk about, say, like Irish whiskey, a lot of the time I say I work with Jameson. It's not really something I've heard of, like Jameson and cigars, but I think a lot of the time I have heard of people doing events and things like that, and a lot of it comes to the more premium ones. So something I would be suggesting something like Jameson 18-year-old, or any of the like older Redbreast or something like that. They'd be ones that like anything that packs a lot of like punch in it is something that goes really well with a cigar, I would say. Not a big cigar smoker myself, so I can't speak too much, but that would be my impression.
Right. Well, one unfortunate thing that's happened for me during the lockdown, I've become very partial to a quality cigar. But we unfortunately live in a country where we can't publicize them for health reasons, obviously. But Megan, I just want to thank you for your time. This came together very quickly, like Wednesday afternoon when Adrian suggested it, and judging by number of comments and people who are watching live, everyone really enjoyed it. And I would like to make a commitment that within the next 4 to 6 weeks, we'll make a Zoom tasting happen. And I'm liking more the idea of a sort of demonstration of drinks. Mixing your drinks. We'll give them most of the ingredients. Some they have to get fresh, and how to mix the drinks, how to get the flavors out. And then we can follow up with just a premium whiskey little minis as well.
That's good.
Yeah.
Cool. Sounds great. People can let us know what they'd like to try. We can build it from there.
Yeah. And when they're in a bar or somewhere, say, hey, that's not how you make Jamesons and dry. Megan told us. Yeah.
I've had a session with the ambassador.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Cool. And a couple of people have commented that they're quite keen on a Zoom tasting, so we'll make that happen. Yeah.
Sweet.
Oh,
amazing.
Sweet. So you and I will stay here, have a chat after. But hey, everyone who's watching, thank you so much from me. And I'm sure Megan appreciates everyone who's been watching.
For sure. Hope everyone has a lovely evening.
Yeah. All right. See you guys.
Bye.